Woohoo! Thank you, thank you. The best news for those of you who are tired of engineering is there really is no engineering in this course for the next 2 hours. You don't have to think about engineering. You don't have to really think about math. You don't even really have to think about science if you don't want to, because what we're going to talk about really is what's the other side of this grant. A lot of people want to talk about the STEM side, which is the content side, and it is a STEM grant. But it's also, as you know, because there's nothing but teachers in the room, it's also really a grant designed to change the way you teach. So if you're wondering, how did I slip through? Actually, Denny and I slipped through, because Denny Dupps, who's also your video guy, he's also not a science or math person. How did we slip through? It's because we are the other side of the grant, which is we're working to change the way you look at teaching. And so that's what we're going to talk about today for the next 2 hours. Everything I've always done since 1995 is available somewhere on the web. In this case, it is in the 2004 Summer CEEMS wiki. I put it on a wiki, because if people want to use a wiki, I'll put it on a wiki. If you want it on a web page, I'll put it on a web page. We're going to put it somewhere. The key to that is if you thought I talked too fast or you missed something, or sometimes I put things on there that I'm not really going to get to, but they're kind of background for you. I also think that's kind of a nice tool for you. You can always go back and kind of review it, look at it, and it summarizes what I hope you get out of this 2 hours or hour and 45 or whatever we end up having. So that's the key to my existence. I am a social studies teacher by trade, but I'm really a pedagogy and educational technology person by avocation. I really like talking about how do people teach. Okay, a couple other things. One, the pictures that you see are of my grandson. He did just get glasses, so I don't have any of those pictures up there, but that's been the adventure this week. He's 2 years old, July 5th. He's the love of my life. He's the reason when I retired, they didn't throw a retirement party, they threw a baby shower because 5 days after I left Princeton, my grandson was born. So everybody knows that's a big deal to me. I'm a firm believer that good pedagogy is not unique to one field. In fact, I would argue pedagogy should be the subject. It shouldn't really be pedagogy in social studies, pedagogy in science, pedagogy in math. It should be, how can we be an effective teacher getting students engaged, collaborating, innovating, achieving in any class, because I would argue it's the same art, science, skill, whatever. Okay, today our topic is student engagement. The goal is for you to understand some of the basic concepts related to student engagement, discover new methods for implementing student engagement, and formulate ideas on how you might actually measure it. You know, if you get a guy who used to be the director of assessment, he's a counter, he's somebody who actually understands value added, he's somebody who probably even may like value added, as hard as that is for some people to believe. I am a believer that you can measure change. You can measure change in achievement. You can measure change in your behavior. And so we're going to talk about that throughout this session as well. I did put on here a couple good sites. If you're not familiar with Edutopia, you're not familiar with some of those ASCD stuff, they're great sites. They're good little video clips if you want examples for things that student engagement. But we're going to do things that are going to engage you today. I'm not going to show you videos, but they're there for you. That's what these first three links are. Great video clips, Know the Score, and Edutopia, all great sites. If you get a chance, if this is a topic you're interested in, if you're struggling with a concept or something, those are great sites for you. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is the first thing you do in the engineering design process. It's the first thing you do in the scientific method. It's the first thing we do in social studies. We have to define our terms. Now, the cool thing is, because this is something we've all done, I don't have to be the one to define the term, what we mean by student engagement. We can define it. So I want to ask you, some of you are required to be here because you're cohort 3. Some of you are here because maybe this is a topic that interests you. But what do you mean when you use the phrase student engagement? If I said to you, students seemed engaged, or they didn't seem engaged in your class, what does that mean to you?
To me, it means that my kids are actively engaged, they're actively participating in their acquisition of knowledge.
Okay, so first one I got right. Participation. So we used to call that, do you remember what we used to call that, Mr. Wilson? What did we used to call that when we evaluated teachers? Students are on On task. We used to have a little tick mark. How many students are actually on task? We even got better with our tick marks. Instead of just a check mark, we would start putting Q if the student asked a question, A if the students add an answer. There were all sorts of little parts of that little diagram you'd have. You make a little diagram in the class. We'd actually start to measure and we started learning things like if the girls sat on one side of the class, the male teachers tended to teach over here, and we started to notice that they talked more to the front than they did to the back. So the students who really didn't want to participate, they stayed way back in the back here. Steve Geraci's working on lesson plans. He's not paying attention to me at all. He sat in the back row on purpose. That's what we do. It's when we're Baptists, we sit in the back unless we know we're going to be part of the service. We're going to sit in the back. We're good with that. Okay? Here's the thing. Participation is just step one, right? Because if Johnny isn't participating, if he's standing on the table, if he's every 3 times a period asking to go to the bathroom, he's not even engaged, he's not even participating. Okay, that's good. What else? He's interested with something you said, Mr. Bridges. What would tell you that? Because that's kind of an esoteric term. That's almost that's a mental thing, and I'm not sure I can do like a what do they call it, an electroencephalogram. I could probably do if I could attach, which some of us would like to attach probes to our students, wouldn't we? Apply a slight correction to that one in the back row. How would we gauge interest?
By being awake and alert. And
The Princeton standard. He's just awake, man. All right, you've been there 1 year. We already got it. Just keep them awake, brother. As long as they aren't sleeping, the principal, and I'll tell you, there's nothing that pisses off a principal more than to see kids sleep in your class. So that is a measurement. I'm hoping that's not the only measurement. I won't make fun of Princeton too many times, but because he's here, he'll get a kick out of it because he's been through all the same pain I went through of different principals having different standards. And for some of them, if you just kept them awake, you had tenure. That was all you needed. Just keep everybody awake. But what else? You didn't really mean just awake. What are they doing?
You hit the nail on the head, asking questions, answering questions.
Okay. So they're part of, one might even say they're part of the mission. So I use the terms here, collaboration. So if they're actually, I always said if they're still talking about what I talked about in class in the lunchroom, I didn't care. If you'd walk in the lunchroom and you'd hear them like still either arguing a point or just, did you hear what he said about Andrew Jackson? Oh, man, if you can get a 15-year-old at lunchtime to talk about Andrew Jackson, you are gifted. I don't care what anybody says, because that's not their natural conversation. Andrew Jackson. Shouldn't really be anybody's, I guess. But, okay, and then I went another step that if Johnny actually, or Juan, or whoever it is, if he initiates something, why is that a different level? He's got some ownership because he's now steering. He's guiding the lesson. Because if you're doing a good conversation, if you're doing a good, even if it's directed learning, which we're starting with here, kind of you're leading them on to a certain degree, if he starts pulling the direction one way, you've won because now you're seeing he's interested. He wants to know, where's this conversation going? Because it sounds to me like you're saying Andrew Jackson was a racist, and I don't want to say it because you said he was your favorite president, which means you're a racist. No, let's separate, this issue because that's not what I said. Let's go back to what did I say? I said Jackson had trouble with Indians, but he was still a great president for his time. Okay, but you got him asking questions if he's initiating. So if I get any of you today, actually, I'm going to feel good. Okay, now the last one, some would argue this is the result of engagement, but I would argue that because Johnny owns his own scores, achievement is also part of saying Johnny's engaged in what you're doing. Because if Johnny is going home, getting the book out, and actually reading the assignment, and thinking about it, and asking questions in class, and eventually studies enough for the test to get a better score than you would have predicted, then that's achievement, and that's tied into how well you engaged him. Okay. Then that brings us to the second question. How close do you believe? Yes, sir. But I would argue that if a kid is interested, I'll go back to Maria Montessori. Kids are going to explore and find their own way eventually all the time. Your goal is to keep feeding whichever direction they go. Here's another, I'll give you another example. I was a National Merit Scholar. I was a pretty good test taker. I firmly believe the reason I was a good test taker is because in the 1960s, Marvel comic books had a high level of vocabulary. I was always having to look words up to understand what Thor was saying to Odin. Now, I would argue that it is reading itself, not what I was reading. There are some teachers who would tell you, oh, don't let Johnny read comic books. They're like of the devil or they're evil. That's just fun stuff. He needs to read Mark Twain. You know what? I think he just needs to read. And I'll tell you what that made me do when I raised my children. I told them I didn't care what they read. I would buy them books. Go to the library and get them books. I had one daughter who went from reading about horses, the thoroughbred girls or something, I forget what it was, and she went into vampires. It did not frighten me at all that she went into vampires. There's some fun stuff in that dark fantasy, entertaining for everybody. And eventually, she got the same test scores I did. So I think that if you let somebody roam, if you go from fractions to fractals, you'll eventually come back to me, and you're just showing you maybe have a little bit of a nonlinear way of thinking, and I'm okay with that. But you're right. You may suffer a little short-term gain. I would argue that as you're doing these CEEMS lessons, the first 3 you do, I don't want to plant this for you because the year is going to seem really long when I say this. The first 2 or 3 of these CEEMS lessons that you do, they're going to go longer than you thought because you're not really going to like the way it goes, and you're going to keep trying to repair it as you're flying along, and you're going to think, this isn't working. Here's what I would say to you about that, having watched 2 cohorts go through this. Eventually, if you get kids to buy into the notion that they own what they're learning and they have to discover it and they have to participate and engage, the long-term effect on those students, and if you only have them for 1 year, you're going to say, oh, this isn't working very well. But if more and more teachers do this, it will have a long-term lasting effect on the way kids are educated. Because ultimately, there's so much available. We really don't need you to teach them and memorize the periodic table. They can put it on a device and they can hold it for the rest of their life if they want it. Not only can they hold the periodic table, they can hold the whole Library of Congress. It just isn't that difficult to find information. What's difficult is the skill of what to do with the information. How do I put it together and solve a problem? Challenge-based learning. How do I put it together and realize the solution to the problem wasn't a very good one? Engineering-based design process that says, you know what, you got to go back, you got to correct, you got to refigure, recalibrate, recalculate, whatever you're doing. That's what we want them to be doing. We want them to think that way in the classroom. I'm not the right answer every minute of every day. I can't know everything. Now, I can look it up pretty quick on the internet because I'm really good at that. I'll come up with the right answer pretty quick. But I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But here's the good thing about the engineering design process. Have we ever built the perfect wing? I don't think so. I think each wing that we develop as engineers gets a little bit better. A little bit longer, a little bit bowed, a little bit shorter, whatever. For its purpose, that wing is as good as we could do today. Then we decided not metal, maybe composites, and not composites, maybe not wires at all, maybe do it electric. All sorts of ways you can improve the wing. That's what engineers do, that's what problem solving is, and that's what we should be aiming at with our student engagement. Yes, we do have to be concerned with short-term gains because the state's always going to be testing us. And I don't want to tell you ignore the test because nobody can ignore the test. But long-term, the investment you're making, 2 years of practicing this, by your 3rd year, by the time this program's over, you got your degree and the laptop is then old, you're going to feel like this should, I advocate replacing your laptop every 2 years, but that's just me. This should make you not only a better teacher, but your students better students, and in the end, it's going to work for you. Yes? Each year you teach the same curriculum, you get better. You polish your skills, you polish your content knowledge, you polish your pedagogy, you polish every part about it. First year, you're not very good. And for any of you that have children, if they get a first-year teacher, they're not very good. They're very enthusiastic, they're very energetic, but they're not very good. Second year, about 10 to 25% of the time, they're pretty good. They've got a few lessons that worked, and they'll use them again, and they're okay. By the 3rd year you teach them, and I'm telling you this as somebody who taught 3 decades. By the 3rd year I taught AP Euro, I pretty much had the pace down. I would argue that about 65 to 75% of the lessons were above average, but I still had some weaknesses. By the 4th year, it kind of felt like I was the master of my own domain. I was in the zone most days. Still had a couple days. And by the way, my little note on efficacy, you see it in bold? When we talk about teacher effectiveness, I had one of my daughters twice and one of my daughters once in my own class. Nothing will give you an understanding of your effectiveness or lack thereof than a teenager riding to and from work with you every day who is sitting with you for an hour and has no qualms because they know you're going to keep feeding them. No qualms about telling you exactly what they thought about Andrew Jackson in the presentations you did today, even though he is your favorite president. They know that. They still think it was boring. okay? And don't bother telling you that. So in terms of efficacy, what I would say is that if you take this 2 years and learn to be a better teacher, it will affect anything you teach, because you'll come to accept what we're telling you about. If you use student-centered learning thoughts, if you aim to have a lesson, and one of the things we're going to talk about is, I learned to teach in 1978. The method that I was given was very teacher-directed. I had a professor at Miami who was very well regarded, very well published, but basically what he said was, write the best lesson plan and do your best job. Never in the entire 2 semesters of methods classes did he mention students. It was a teacher methodology class. And here's what I learned in my first year teaching. First, I lost 15 pounds student teaching, and then my year of teaching, I got a little sick. I was working my ass off. I was coming home every night. I was outlining chapters, reproducing them, giving them to the students, helping them every way I could, making flashcards. Near the end of the year, my wife, Mike knows, lovely woman, she's a psychology major. I believe I'm a long-term project for her. 35 years of therapy, and I'm still buying things at Tiffany's. But she said to me at the end of the year, why are you working so hard? And I said, because I want to keep a job. I don't have tenure. I want to be the best teacher. And she said, but you already know all this stuff. Isn't your goal to get them to work harder? And I'm telling you, it was like, often when she speaks, I heard angels. I heard like harps playing. I said to myself, wait, why didn't they give me a class in learning about how students see the teacher? And so now they give you Ed Psych, you get Piaget, and you get all that crap about, object permanence when you lift it up. No longer does peekaboo work and all that. No, I mean, how does an adolescent look at you, and what is he doing? So I stopped writing lesson plans from the perspective of, and I would argue all of your CEEMS lessons, this should be the case. Do not write them from the perspective of what's the content that's being covered, or what you as the professional with all your multiple degrees is going to be doing. Work the lesson backwards. What's the outcome? What do we want Johnny to be able to notice? That's what I said at the beginning. Here's what you're supposed to have when we finish here. Work it backwards. What is he going to be doing? What is he engaged in? What is he or she or them? What are they doing to get what it is you want them to get? Not what are you doing? You already know this stuff. And a lot of people, when they do lesson plans, they sit around and think about the content more than they do whether the students are engaged in what they're doing. Because no matter how good the lecture, no matter how good the activity, no matter how many pieces of clip art you put on a worksheet, if they're still bored, they aren't engaged, and they aren't going to get it in the end, okay? All right. Can we measure student engagement? Let's talk about what's gone on here so far. I'm talking way too much. For me, right now, tell me how engaged you are in what we're doing. And how would I know it as the instructor? Because I'm real big on formative assessment, so we have to pause every once in a while. I call these schizophrenic moments. I used to talk about this in my methods class. Schizophrenic moments. If you're going to teach teaching methods, you got to every once in a while stop and talk about the method you just used. What did we just use, and was it effective? Were you engaged? What's your name, by the way? Carla. Carla, were you engaged?
I was.
Did you check Facebook, check email while you were sitting here in the last 15 minutes?
No, I don't even have my laptop.
Okay. How would I know you were engaged?
Eye contact.
Okay.
Body language.
Okay.
I'm kind of full from lunch, so I could have easily been slumped over.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Someone else. How would I know? Were you engaged or not? On a scale of 1 to 10, I don't care what measurement you use. We don't have a rubric today so far. Were you engaged and why? Were you engaged and how would I know? Yes. What's your name?
I'm
Karen. Thank you.
I went, you might have thought I wasn't on task if you're watching me from the front, but I went on to my, one of my Google Docs and was typing some things about what you were saying that related to what I was
Actually taking notes.
So
That's good.
I felt like if we're looking at the stuff we're talking about, that I was initiation. I was applying it to.
Okay, already applying it. Okay.
Already applying it.
And I'm not keeping track because I've got a videotape of the whole thing, so I'm going to record your scores later. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. Well, am I kidding? Okay. So we could do a self-evaluation. That's what I'm hearing, is we could just ask people, are you engaged? On a scale of 1 to 5, raise your hand right now. 5 being, this is interesting, I'm glad I came, even though I was forced to be here. 4, it's pretty interesting, it's okay, it's mildly entertaining. 3, it's like everything else we've been doing. I'm glad it's not engineering, but beyond that. 2, I don't really know why they hired this guy. He's old and he shouldn't be here. And 1, I wish I were at the toilet. By the way, that used to be my first speech when I had classes. I would tell students, because you're only allowed to go to the bathroom so many times. That was one of the rules. So I would tell students, here's the thing about going to the bathroom. There are 3 reasons why students in high school go to the bathroom. First one is they have a biological need. I had daughters, I don't want to know. I don't want to know why you have to go, but if you have to go to the bathroom, just take the pass, it's right there, go, sign out, do whatever you're supposed to do, but don't tell me about it. I just don't want to know. 2, you're going because you have some sort of social life involved in like meeting somebody in the bathroom, meeting your boyfriend. And my daughter told me she did this in middle school. I didn't know that until she was in high school. Sandy, she was meeting Sandy in the middle school bathroom, outside the bathroom. They weren't in the same bathroom because he was a boy, but well, I wanted to clear that up. I mean, everybody has their bathrooms. And the third reason you're going is you are so bored with what I'm doing, you'd rather be in a toilet than be here. And if you ever feel that way, I would beg you to raise your hand and say to me, Mr. Dugan, I would rather be in the toilet right now than do what we're doing. You know who the only one that ever did that was?
Your daughter?
Yeah. They talked her into it in class one day in AP US History, and she raised her hand. She said, I'd rather be doing something else than this. And I said, okay. We stopped what we were doing, we changed. And that got around really quickly. He actually means that. So that's the whole bathroom thing. Okay. On a scale of 1 to 5, where are you? So we could take a measurement, right? Okay. All right. So give me an example of a lesson where you felt you had student engagement and what caused it. And I don't want any unconscious competence here. Just don't tell me it just happened. You all done that conscious competence, unconscious competence. What is that? Who is that? That's somebody. We did that one day for administrative. There's conscious competence, there's conscious incompetence, there's unconscious competence and unconscious incompetence. People that, what it is 20 years after transactional analysis, who I am and I know who I am and I don't know who I am and all that. Long story short, if you're doing something, you should know why you're doing it. When was the last time you remember having or seeing, if you're an administrator, you can tell me you saw it somewhere. When was the last time you remember student engagement?
I was doing a lesson.
Tell me your name first.
Brandy.
Brandy, okay.
I was doing a lesson on speed and acceleration.
Okay.
And I had my students build cars.
Okay.
And I just gave them a bunch of stuff and didn't tell them how to do it. And I told them, at the end, we're going to race them. So you have to, figure out how to make them really fast so that we can race them. And I built a track and we had the whole 9 yards. And just about even the students who never listened to me were doing it.
What one word is the key word for why they were so engaged?
Competition.
Competition. There's Brandon, is he in here? Brandon Williams? He's not in here. He wasn't here earlier. I saw him at Hughes do a lesson on wings, building wings on a fan and having the fan blow the wings and making the rotor go around faster and faster, and they measured them and they put the top 5 at the end of the day on the board, and there was this huge competition about the creation of the shape of the wings. There's no reason for a 14-year-old to care about the shape of a wing, but they care about their name on the board. So you got to tie what they care about with what you need them to do, because it's not natural for a 14-year-old to want to do that. So that's competition is one. Give me another one. Anybody? Yep.
Squares.
Say again?
Punnett squares.
Punnett squares? Okay. Why?
They went home, they interviewed their parents, and they were able to determine what traits came from what
Yeah.
generation.
My grandmother had long earlobes and,
Right.
yeah, okay.
Right, and they loved it because it was about them.
Okay.
It was about them.
Personalize it. Yeah. We used to do a 4th quarter world history project where one of the things they had to do was 3 interviews, and they had to be from 3 different generations. And there were kids who, at the end of the course, had interviewed like a grandfather that had been in World War II, and the next year would come back to me and say, he died. And the only thing I have left of him is that recording, because they had to record it on a cassette tape. I checked to make sure the interview was there. That's the only recording I have of my grandfather, and I'm gonna cherish that for the rest. I was like, well, cool. I'm glad you got it. So personalize it. Competition. Personalize it. What else? Yes, ma'am.
I've done several things where you have to smash eggs.
Oh yeah, drop the eggs.
Drop it in the
Oh, that's sad. No Kens?
We did have Spice Girl and
A Spice Girl?
and G.I. Joe, but
Oh, G.I. Joe, okay. But G.I. Joe was like rappelling with a parachute because he was prepared. Barbie doesn't come with a parachute. G.I. Joe does. Okay.
but even they just love that.
Yeah.
ability of-
Rocket launching, I was at Norwood Middle School when we did the rocket launches and measuring how far and how high and all that stuff. Yeah, so anything that involves activities, nothing like just sitting here for 2 hours, you know, flat on a chair versus actually getting them doing something. Okay, anything else?
Show them how it relates to something else. Like when we did Punnett Squares, I showed them how you could use it to FOIL in math. So then when they were done with the Punnett Squares, they went to math class and she was showing first, outer, inner, last, and they said, well, wait a minute, in science, and they loved it showing another teacher something that they found in one class to another class.
I got in trouble doing one of those things because I decided one year in world history, before we got to the 1400s, I was just going to assume the world was flat, and so I started telling them that. And you know what, ninth graders, they're not real bright, so if you tell it to them often enough, and they got to science class one day, and he started talking about, you know, the planet and about it being round, and they're like, Mr. Dugan said the planet's flat. I was like, yeah.
That mine wasn't a lot.
Yeah, well, but it's fun, you know, just fool with the science people because they're easily, you know, a lot of science teachers I found aren't really teaching science, they're teaching religion. They're teaching dogmatic science. You know, here's the answer, I'll show you how to get to it and let's go to the next chapter. They don't really teach the inquiry, but that's what this whole thing is about. We've got to quit teaching in this country, in this planet, that science is something debatable. It isn't debatable, it's explorable, it's investigating. But ultimately, there's some notion that we're telling you stuff that matters, and you need to understand it. You can't just accept somebody's word that it's right. Yeah. Okay. Are there particular strategies, pedagogies that will enhance, encourage, or stimulate student engagement? We've talked about a couple of them. Those Edutopia videos will give you some examples of that. And as a schizophrenic moment, what we just did here, which is the end of my presenting here, how is generating student engagement, positive or negative, when the teacher's leading the discussion?
Can you say that again?
Yeah, I wrote it better. How do classroom discussions generate, I should have put how well do classroom discussions, teacher-led classroom discussions, which this was, how well do they generate student engagement? In the back, tell me your name.
It depends. Oh, my name's Kevin. I'm sorry.
Kevin, that's all right. I'd just like to,
It depends on like your style of presentation, I guess. I don't have much experience in it, but I've received some information about interactive lectures where you keep the student engagement. If I'm doing that type of lesson, what I do is I carry transitions throughout the class. Yes, there's a point in time where it's a teacher-led discussion, but I'll transition into maybe like a 5-minute quick activity or a quick write or something
Right.
like that. Even in math, a quick write is
a quick journal is really good for doing that. Yeah,
it's
yeah.
great if they can write about it, or they can come up with some sort of question on their own.
Right.
And it just furthers the conversation along the class.
Exactly. And to your, I didn't get your name, sir. What was your Musa. To your point, we could not have survived if he wanted to spend 20 minutes talking about fractals. We just couldn't. So at some point, in a teacher-directed, no matter how much student engagement you're trying to encourage, there is a point at which I know you're really loving fractals, and maybe after class we can talk about them and how they may relate to this, but I've got to move on because I got to cover this stuff and I got to get to the next section. So, okay, first section. All right, second section. Now, if you have a computer open and can read it, if not, I'll just put them up here. This is a quick little article. I just want you to glance through it. 10 ways to encourage, get better student. Come on, all these ads, come on. Okay, and in fact, one of them is what you just said. The first couple, create an emotionally safe classroom. If you're always making fun of kids because they're whatever, then they're not going to feel comfortable talking. Intellectually safe means that they know that they're okay, both mentally and physically. Cultivate your engagement meter, and that's what I talk about if you're encouraging or you're just saying you're encouraging. There's a couple in here that I think are really significant, and there's the practice journal or blog writing. Notice This is what we've been talking about. You can actually use the design process in your presentation to encourage that if we did go down that road to fractals, or if we did spend a little bit of time on, was Jackson really a racist or not, or where does that idea come from? Why does the textbook author say that? Allow it to flow a little bit. Don't be so rigid that the next slide comes up in PowerPoint and that's what I got to be on, because that's what I'm going to be on, because that's slide 34. That's the end of the conversation. Give yourself that freedom, which the design process does, to realize, you know what, maybe there's a spot, and maybe you'll change the slide next time to say, you know what, maybe we'll go off here a little bit on fractals, because that's kind of a cool notion, whatever. Okay. If you get a chance, that's a cool little list, and I'm a big fan of Edutopia, so if you haven't seen Edutopia sites, use them. Okay, what I'd like for you to do now, get a small little script of paper. It doesn't matter, scrap paper, you're not going to hand it in. Just take a little script of paper. Okay. It only has to be big enough to fit 2 or 3 words. Okay, now, and before you answer the question, I'm going to ask the question and then give you an explanation of why I'm asking it the way I am. So don't write anything down yet. Okay, what you're going to write down eventually is you're going to pick something that you happen to be interested in. Now, it can be something like a sport, it can be an author, it can be a thing, it can be something more esoteric like painting or quilting or something, and then list a tool. And I don't really care what the tool is. It can be a shovel or spade, it can be an iPad, it can be anything in between. I happen to have an interest in radio scanning, like listening to the aircraft tower at the Cincinnati airport, listening to police, fire. My son-in-law is a lieutenant in the Covington Fire Department, so I like listening to emergency vehicles. Years ago, before they encrypted them, you could listen to people's cell phones. I found that fascinating. Anywhere in the neighborhood, you could, within about a half mile, you could hear anybody's mobile phone. It was fascinating to know who was selling drugs in my neighborhood and what they were doing. And, so I have what Peter Berger, the sociologist, called, I have the sociological voyeuristic gene, meaning I want to look in the keyhole to see what's going on in the next room. I'm fascinated with what people are doing, and I really don't care that other people know that I'm interested in it, okay? I like hearing people's conversations even when they don't know I'm listening. Okay? So like planes are talking to the tower and things, that's kind of a cool thing. So I had a teacher once who I had purchased a few iPads for. I used to be a technology director, so I bought a few iPads, and she wanted more. And I said, well, tell me what you're going to do with them. And she goes, what do you mean, what am I going to do with them? Here's what they do. Don't you know? I mean, I'm the one who was promoting them. You know what they do. And I go, yeah, but I want to know what you're going to do with more if I give them to you. Well, she didn't really understand what I meant. She was the gifted teacher, and she just had them once every 2 days or something. And I said, well, let me give you an example of what I might do if I put a lesson together using an iPad and scanning. And so I copied this lesson. Those of you that, there's 1 or 2 in here that have had me for class before. You may have seen this before. I actually put the whole lesson together and then showed how using scanners, listening to the tower, studying the airfield, you could go off on any number of directions. If you were a science teacher, you might go off on the noise direction, because noise when you live near an airport is a big deal. You could go off onto the flight direction if you were an engineer. You could go off into a math data thing where there aren't as many planes landing in Cincinnati as there used to be. What's the net effect of that cost-wise on the airport, on the community, so forth? So you could do kind of a data thing. You could do a history thing. Why is the Cincinnati Airport CVG, which stands for Covington, and it's not even in Kenton County, it's in Boone County? Why is that? Why does Kenton County own the airport that's in Boone County? There's a whole history of the airport and how it's run, and if you don't think that's current events, you haven't been reading Northern Kentucky news, because they are all fired up about what's going on. For a while, they were all partying and drinking on public money, and that kind of got squashed because everybody found out about it. But long story short, there's a lot of different directions you can go from this concept. Radio scanner, airport, and an iPad. Because you can get a little app or you can listen to the scanner. We're not going to do that if I were teaching the lesson. We would do that and I'd let you listen. But it's kind of fascinating. Listening, it's really fascinating when the president comes in. When Air Force One lands, it takes on a whole different deal. Big deal. They do a whole security check. You can listen to them talking to the helicopters. They're doing heat seeking around the airport. It's fascinating what they do when the president comes in. Okay, anyway, long story short, you could just look at that lesson as the kind of thing that you might do. Now, I don't know that that's in anybody's curriculum. I don't know that that would meet a standard. I'm sure you could figure out a standard that would meet. My point is only that your goal in this CEEMS project here ultimately is to meet it to the standards, but very few people would have thought of taking that personal interest thing, listening to a scanner, airports, flights, and you could have done it with police, you could do it with fire, you can do it with whatever, and an iPad, and tying it into an activity to use. That's what I want you to think about. I want you to put down now a word that is something you're interested in. Whatever, cooking, explosions, travel, whatever. 1 or 2 words at most, and then a piece of technology. I don't care what it is, video camera, computer, iPad, iTouch. It can actually be an Android device. I'll go that far. We can really extend it. I'm just kidding. I'm an Apple guy. Okay, I'm going to give you like 3 minutes. Think of something, just put it on your paper. Anybody need more time? Okay, here's what I want you to do. At your table, there's no more than 4 at each table, so that's fine. Just at your table, I want you to take all those slips and pick 3, no more than 5 of the topics and 1 of the tools and come up with a couple of sentences that describe a engineering-based design, challenge-based lesson concept. You don't have to write the whole lesson. I'm not asking that. I'm only going to give you about 10 minutes. Have conversation at your table. Which of these concepts can we put together? And don't tell me they don't go together, because all of life goes together. It is part of what we are. So figure out something that's going to pull 3, no more than 5, because you get more than 5, the lesson gets too long. By the way, for those of you who haven't figured it out, I would never make your CEEMS units longer than 5 days. Just my personal opinion. I would never make them longer than 5 days. If you do, it's going to extend out forever, and you're going to be like, oh, crazy. Small lessons, okay? Okay, I'm going to give you 10 minutes, conversation at your table, come up with a concept for a lesson utilizing these things. What I'd like for you to do, I'm going to have each group just kind of stand up, and in a 2 to 3 minute presentation, doesn't have to be fancy, I just want you to tell us what were the terms and what was the tool, and then a quick description of the lesson. And while you're thinking on how you're doing that, the key questions I really want, because we're not really making these lessons, right? Although some of you may go, oh, this sounds like a good lesson, I'll try that. What we're really interested in is, was this difficult to do? Does the randomness, I didn't put any parameters on it. It wasn't like I said it's a chemistry lesson, you got to pick elements, or it was a history lesson, you got to pick dates or battles or something. Does the randomness help or hinder? In other words, how much choice can Johnny have? Because we've already said if Johnny has some choice, if Johnny gets to initiate something or gets to have a vote on whether we do X or Y. I mean, if I was told on the chore chart every day, and by the way, I had a chore chart. My father was a drill instructor in the Marine Corps. I had a chore chart every day of things I had to accomplish. I did not like having a chore chart, ever. However, when my parents went out occasionally and my older brother was in charge and he suggested that as a fun activity we do the dishes, it was a blast. Why? Because we did it together, collaborated, and we did it for fun. We thought we had a choice. I know my parents told my brother, make sure the dishes get done, make sure the place is cleaned up before you go to bed, but we thought we had a choice, so giving children that choice. So does the randomness help or hinder? How does this exercise in creativity help at getting the concepts that we've discussed about student engagement? How does it help us? Okay, let's start all the way in the back. Penalize the people who sit in the back. This group, you were really confident you have what was going on. Give it to us. What do you got? Very cool. Sounds like a great engineering lesson, like prosthetic devices. I can see post-war development. I mean, this is the sick part about the last couple of wars we've been in. we haven't lost as many lives, but we've returned a lot of wounded. And so the prosthetics industry has come up with some really cool, it's not cool, it's not the word, appropriate and effective and wonderful devices that help returning warriors. Yeah, very cool. Okay, good. And what do you think about doing it this way? Like if we let you do that, give you the choice, give you just pick out your own terms. In terms of getting student engagement in your group, what did you think? When you allow children or adults to have a little bit of time to talk amongst themselves, come up with their own plan, in terms vis-a-vis our discussion of student engagement, what do you think? Okay, cool. And 4 different people, we came up with 4 different ideas. Okay. Science fiction, by the way, for those of you who are STEM people, science fiction, a much underused area for STEM. Okay, next group. And that's kind of a useful thing. There are a lot of people, I mean, Johnny Manziel, kind of weird getting 3 sports, but there are a lot of people who are cross drafted and have to make a decision, are they going to play football? And some of them go, you know what, you can play baseball a lot longer than you play football because they don't last. They get hit all the time. You know, I mean, occasionally Devin takes one on the arm, but most baseball players last a little bit longer if they're good. So yeah, that longevity thing. Okay, what do you think about this collaborative activity, doing this?
Good.
Some of the best lessons I ever wrote, I was, this is a weird job, but I was the National Cable in the Classroom teacher advisor for a couple of years. And back in the old days when you had cable TV, part of it went to what was called a franchise fee. Some of that money went to a national organization that did things for teachers. One of the things it gave was every building in America that is a public school got internet access and cable TV paid through that fund. And one of the things they did was they paid teachers to write lessons. And so I was attached to VH1, which would do these music specials. So like the 25 greatest civil rights songs, or the 25 songs that are listened to by soldiers in combat. And then you'd create a unit on, after the students would watch the show, it would get the teachers to tape the show. The lesson would be all online. And so it's fascinating. As a history teacher, you don't frequently, but it got me thinking more, and I started every once in a while tying in a song. And this is a really old song and a really stupid thing to mention, but in AP history, one of the things you have to teach students to do is read documents carefully, document-based questions, document analysis. And so to start, the first time we ever did it, we took a song. And if you probably never heard this song, but it's the Ode to Billy Joe, where the older people remember. Basically, it's a song about a girl sitting at the table at dinner, and they start talking, and somebody's jumped off a bridge and committed suicide. And so they never tell you in the song why he committed suicide, but you can kind of get from the song where they were, Deep South, what they were, Pentecostal, brotherhood of some kind, and you can kind of read into the story, and that is what we do. Before we had videos that gave you the whole explicit story of what was happening in the song, you had to create the story in the song. What was the story really about? And so that was the document. I made them analyze and give me the answer to why did he jump off the bridge? And so it forced them into a weird way listening to the song a couple times, and then they started listening to music differently, I think, as a result. But using music is a great idea. Okay, so last thing we want to talk about is how does group work or student participation activity generate student engagement? Everybody agrees it does. Why might students work harder if they help create a lesson? We said that several different ways. How are student expectations about the teacher of the lesson in the room related to achievement? Now this is something I want to get to. I did not do it here because I know there's a lot of other things going on in this room, so we never move the tables. I'm a big proponent of not sitting in rows straight at the teacher and leaving the room like that. I'm a big proponent of moving the rooms around. You'll see this in buildings that I've been involved in the design of, which would be the new Princeton Middle School and High School, is everything in the furniture is mobile. The deal is you can't keep people in rows and expect them to get real creative. If you've never thought about the environment that you teach in, can I suggest a person, actually a company, not a company, a design firm. It's called The Third Teacher. There's a quote that says kids learn from 3 teachers. 1 is the adults in their life, 2 is the children in their life, and 3 is the environment that they live in. The book is called The Third Teacher. You don't have to buy it because a lot of the information is on here. There's in fact 79 ways to use design to transform teaching and learning in your own classroom. I'm a big proponent of looking at your environment. So I mentioned that here. Okay. A little bit of, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because we don't have a lot of time, but the people from cohort 2 that are here, you could ask them when you meet up with them, can student engagement be high every day? Obviously not. I mean, I don't expect students to be real engaged if they're taking a multiple choice test or something. But that makes you ask yourself, well, then maybe am I always going to use multiple choice tests? Is it possible that student engagement could be tied to a more authentic form of assessment? List 3 types of activities that will increase student engagement. We've given you a couple examples here. Asking students questions, asking them to present, having them do small group work. So we've got some of that. One thing I forgot to do was touch base with John Hattie. So let me go back here. Where is my, okay. I forgot in talking about teacher efficacy, and I apologize, but I want to make sure I've introduced this concept to you. Remember when I said in teaching methods, being taught teaching methods, I was taught all about what the teacher did and not so much about what the student did. There's a wonderful, a couple of books and a guy who he's what we call a meta-researcher. A meta-researcher, by definition, is someone who studies the research that other people have done. In other words, if I wanted to know what the net effect of growth, net effect on growth of sunlight and water and nutrition to the soil, I could probably find hundreds of people who had studied that. And the goal would be to take all of those different types of studies and put them into a meta-analysis and see what the net effect was, to figure out what is the effect of water in these 1,300 studies that I've looked at. Well, now imagine if you did that with education. If you took all of the available research on education and said, what is the net effect of this type of pedagogy? That's what John Hattie did. And I'll give you the math real quickly. I promise you no math and no science and no engineering, but his baseline effect size is 0.4. So he says anything above 0.4 is a positive, and anything below 0.4 isn't much. And obviously anything in the negative is an actual negative, and we don't hope you're not doing any of those. I strongly recommend you spend just a little time. There are several TED Talks that he's done. There's several books. One is called Visible Learning. One is called Visible Learning for Teachers, which is kind of like a professional development session on your own. But it is the research, the meta-research and analysis that says, here's what works best. 40 years ago, I'm not sure we could have said that. I'm not sure we could have told you, here are the techniques in class that work best. I believe this book does that. If you don't have any other book in your library as a professional educator, I would argue this is the book you should have. Just a short plug there. I get nothing for telling you that. I just believe it. Okay. Hattie has rankings so that he'll make a list for you based on their score, which things work best. One of the things that works best with any kind of audience is feedback. If you don't occasionally ask people how you're doing, so remember when I talked about the schizophrenic moments where we stop and ask? That's huge. It shows you whether people understood what you're talking about or not. Okay, last part, measurement of engagement. All right, there are 2 quick reads. And we don't really need you to read them, but I want them to be there for you to see them. How do we know when students are engaged? We talked about this a little bit. And notice that they give you, how do you know it when it's teacher-directed? And how do you know it when it's student-directed? Because we need students engaged either way. So even if you're going to be a teacher-directed type teacher, they're paying attention, they're taking notes, they're listening, they're asking questions, they're reacting. Even if they giggle at what you said, they're at least paying attention. If it's student-directed learning, they're reading critically. They've got a highlighter or a pen. They're writing to learn. Somebody mentioned that back there, a blog or something. Performing, presenting, inquiring, exploring, interacting with others. So there are some good, quick little ways of knowing when that's happening. Now, could we measure it? Well, I want to show you something the Boston Public Schools uses in their evaluation of teachers. If you're with me online, which you don't have to be, but I'll put it up, it is page 9. There it is. At the top, student engagement. Here are the 4 levels. Unsatisfactory, needs improvement, proficient, exemplary. For teachers, what does this look like? In other words, when I'm evaluating, when I'm the principal in the room and I'm evaluating, I'm partly evaluating teachers are using instructional practices, use instructional practices frequently, consistently, and then for students, this may look like. So I would argue you could have a rubric for student engagement. Because if I'm going to ask you, are you going to measure something, I darn well better have some kind of a rubric that says you can measure something. Right? So that's there for you if you're interested in looking at that. And could you build a rubric for student engagement, and what would it contain? Let's talk about that for a minute. What would be the things, and we can use either this class or you can use your own personal experiences in a class, or if you're an administrator, you can use something you've seen happen elsewhere. What would we put into a rubric for student engagement if we were going to make it part of our evaluation? What would be your look-fors if you had a really good friend who's a really young teacher and they said to you, can you just come and watch my class because I don't feel like my students are really engaged in what I'm doing? What would you put down as the look-fors in your rubric? Yes. Students making eye contact with me or me making contact with you? Okay, so they're not looking down, they're not looking, frequently if you're in a class with laptops, sometimes I'll actually say, put your laptops down. Yeah, because it's difficult. If you got Facebook up and your email's up and it goes bling, bling, we all are Pavlovian. It's hard to even walk down the road without seeing half the people on the campus. They're staring at something. So yeah, eye contact is huge. We don't make enough of it anymore, by the way, personal opinion. What else?
Head nodding.
Head nodding? Yeah. So some kind of interaction with the teacher. Doesn't always have to be shouting amen in the back row, but it can be just a simple, yeah, I'm getting it, I'm with you, I'm following you. And if you're like me and you do a lot, and this is not a room conducive to travel, but if you do a lot of movement, you should be able to see most people are going to follow where you're going because they think something might happen, and it will. Sometimes I stand on the desk or I do a headstand or something just to see if everybody's paying attention, because if you missed it, you missed it, and then they'll talk about it at lunch and you won't be able to tell them. Asking questions, that's right. Initiating activity with me, saying either I didn't get this or could I add something? Because even if my comment isn't necessarily inquisitive, it could be I just want to make a comment because I believe either way you say. I think the best thing that can ever happen in a class is somebody tell me I'm wrong. Catch me at something that I either inadvertently or purposefully said, because the fact is I taught philosophy for about 18 years, and if the conversation gets too one-sided, I switch sides just in the middle of class. So I can effectively argue either side of a point. I've been teaching philosophy for a number of years, so it doesn't matter to me. Which side do you want to be on? I'll take the other side and I'll argue. Well, that irritates and confuses children because they always think you're telling them the truth when in fact, as I would tell them, we're just telling you the company line. I'll never forget the first time I told a group of kids that the geometry they were being taught was just one guy's opinion. I said, well, that's Euclid's version. There's other versions. And they're like, what? I said, there's a whole field called non-Euclidean geometry. All kinds of geometry, because you know what? Geometry's good. Euclidean geometry's good if you want to build a wall, but if you want to get to outer space, you got to get way beyond Euclid, because you'll miss the moon. So you got to have some kind of geometry that works beyond what Euclid says. And they're like, what? What? We thought that's the only that is geometry, because it doesn't say at the top Euclidean geometry when you take that textbook. It just says geometry. They think, again, math teachers, just like science teachers, teaching dogma, not really teaching inquisitive. You tell them Pythagoras was a cult to begin with, and they're like, what? I mean, Pythagoras was a cult. It was like craziness. Until they all figured out that it really does work. Well, what's the difference between insanity and sanity? It's a small bit of acceptance by the majority of people. Okay, student engagement. If we had used a student engagement measurement tool today, what would have been your score based on your level of participation, collaboration, initiation, achievement in this workshop? Write it down right now. I don't care where you write it down. Write down your score.
On what scale?
You pick the scale. 0 to 100, A, B, C, D, F, 0 to 5. I don't care what rubric you use. I want you to write down your score. You're not going to show it to me, so be honest, because some of you would lie if you knew you were going to hand it in. Be honest. Put down your honest score of your level of student engagement. Now, don't talk to anybody about this except yourself. Have that conversation inside. Ask yourself, why was I engaged at the level I was? Am I satisfied that I was engaged? How might I have been encouraged to be more engaged? Because I want to get better. Just because I'm 58 doesn't mean I can improve. How could we have gotten more student engagement out of you today? And I am going to want answers.
What was that?
How could I have gotten your score, self-reported as it is, higher? And I don't care if you say, well, you could have brought donut holes. I'm hungry. Because I'll be honest, I have classes where I have done that because I knew that was the problem. It was the period before lunch. They were having a hard time focusing. I am not above buying 60 donut holes to get Andrew Jackson fascinating, if that's what it takes. I don't do it every day. One of the best classes I ever had was I taped a dollar bill. I was so tired of the students not responding in a discussion. I taped a dollar bill to the board, and I said, the best question for the review today is going to get that dollar. Well, you'd be amazed at what kids will do for $1. This group, I'd probably have to put a 20 up because some of you look like you're pretty well off. But I'm just saying, is that what it would have taken? Would it have taken money? Would it have taken dancing? What would it have taken? I want to hear suggestions.
I used to use a bag of Skittles. That was better than
Bag of Skittles? Yeah. Would that have worked for you today?
it worked for me too. Yeah.
You do have to have some humor. The trouble with humor is it almost always has to be self-deprecating because you can't really make fun of anybody. I mean, political correctness has gone to the nth degree at this point, so I can't make fun. I had a methods class last year that kind of chastised me because I made fun of the male. I have daughters, so I'm kind of pro-female anyway. I always have been pro-female, I guess. 2 years on a boat, you just kind of, you miss them. So, but I said something to the effect of, well, I know why the top scores were the girls because girls always do better in school, and that's, they're just a superior gender. And some of the boys didn't like that. And I was like, take a joke, come on, I was just kidding. But you got to be careful. So you always have to, and you get kind of tired of making fun of yourself at some point. You got to. Okay. Anybody else? What else could we have done? Yes. I'm not going to be rude. I'm not going to interrupt you, but I got nothing. Right. And there is a sensitivity as a teacher because you're like a parent. Sometimes you have to know, Johnny had a bad day last week, Friday, because you never know what happened. Johnny's parents got divorced. Johnny's had a breakup with his girlfriend. That's okay. We're finished. No, we're finished. Johnny's had a bad day, and you do have to kind of have that, but you also have to be careful who gets that day too many times. And there is that. I will be honest, when I first started teaching, I believed Johnny had a right to fail. I no longer accept that. And I met, it was actually a student teacher of mine. She's still at Princeton. Michelle Ritchie is her name. She had a different version of that, and I figured out why she had it. I was a history teacher. She was a social studies teacher with a reading certification, and she concluded correctly that a large portion of our failures, because we both taught the same course, first she was my student teacher, and then as a regular teacher, she started getting better test scores than I did on the 9th grade proficiency. I was like, I got to figure this out. Because she shouldn't have, I'm a white guy. I should have the top score, shouldn't I? Isn't that the way the world works? She's like a girl. I'm an ex-Marine, I'll admit it. I was like, she's a girl, she was my student teacher. She shouldn't have better test scores than I get. That's not right. Well, but I kind of am into that whole design process. There's got to be something I can correct in what I'm doing. You know what it was? She was reading certified. She was doing all kinds of, I call them reading tricks. 3x5 cards for vocabulary and all those little things you learn when you realize if Johnny can't read the test, he can't pass the test. It doesn't matter how interesting, how funny, how bright your lecture was. He doesn't get it because he can't read. Okay, so we got to work on the reading skills. And once I figured that out, then my test scores became close to what hers were. I don't know if I ever beat her, but she's a really good teacher. But that extra reading certification was what I didn't have because I was thinking, just teach the battles and the wars and be interesting and be funny, but it's not enough. You got to realize Johnny might be hungry. Maybe it is just a donut hole and you got him. It's just that little thing. Okay, who else? And I would also say, and this comes from years and years of experience, every once in a while there's a class that you'll think you're a good teacher and things have been going along well for a couple of years and you've just really got all your skill sets and your pedagogy work, and you'll come up with a class and you'll think to yourself, nothing's working. And you got to realize every once in a while that just happens. It's the mix that just isn't going to work. You tolerate it, and at the end of the year you go, thank God I'm done. I can move on next year. I got a new group or next semester, whatever. It is weird how there can be, and I think groups are like that too. Good point. Somebody, you had some. And it is something that we've had to adjust to. I've put all my lessons online, so I'm used to students being online when they're in class, and it doesn't feel as a huge negative to me because normally I feel like if I ask a question, you want an answer bad enough, you might even Google it. just so you can get the answer, and I'm okay with that, because I've had a computer lab, as a social studies teacher, I've had a computer lab for I think the last 10 years I taught. I had computers in the classroom for probably 20, but everybody had their own in the last few. And so I kind of feel comfortable with everybody having their stuff open, because I sort of judge myself. If everybody's head is down and they're checking their email, I got to do something different, get some. But good point. There was somebody over here who had something. Nobody? Okay. Okay, any last minute comments? By the way, you notice when you ask for that commentary, that formative assessment on you, you have to be accepting of maybe everybody didn't like what you did. And that's not easy to do as a first year teacher, but after you get a little bit of experience, you kind of go, okay, well maybe, because you might try it differently the next time if you're open and honest about it. So I think that's those schizophrenic moments, especially when you teach a methods class, and having done that a number of times, I have found there's some methods some students don't like, and you go, oh, what? I did a pretty good job on that. And they're like, yeah, we didn't really like that. You got to be willing to accept that. There is no question. I'm glad you brought up time. There's no question, and I think I mentioned this earlier, but I'll say it again. There's no question the first time through your CEEMS units, you will feel like it's taking forever to cover the standard you're trying to cover. Here's the thing. Keep in mind, you're not just covering the standard, you're teaching them a new way to learn, and you're learning a new way to teach. So if you accept the investment of that time, long range, you're going to be happy. But short range, as somebody in the back mentioned, short range, there's a penalty to you. You're like 2 minutes in the penalty box because now I'm a week behind everybody else. Because everybody else is teaching 8th grade science. They're now a week ahead of you because you took a week off to drop eggs into a basket while students learned about gravity. You could have just told them what gravity was, 32 feet per second, done, move on to the next. But they now grasp gravity in a way that a cracked egg shows you that other things don't. So I think that's something you have to accept as a long-term investment, that your time is kind of crazy in this program for a little bit. And it's okay, because the long-term effect is going to be very positive, if that helps. Does anybody else have any suggestions? Okay, well, I hope you had a good time. It was a pleasure being here, and